Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. Chapter 1. My Name is Pip. My name is Pip. I've never seen my mother or my father, but I visit their graves, read their tombstones, and try to know them through their writings on their tombstones. My father must be a square, dark man with curly black hair, and my mother seems to be freckled and sickly. We live in the country down the river. One day, I was in the river when a man shouted at me, "Stop making noise! Keep still, or I'll cut your throat!" He was a gray and coarse man with iron on his leg. "Tell us your name," he said. "Pip." "Show me your house." I pointed out our village which our house lay on. I was very afraid of him, so I agreed to bring him some food and some tools which he wanted. "Bring them to me tomorrow." As I walked through the road to go back home, my heart trembled with fear. My sister, Mrs. Joe Gargery, was 20 years older or more than me. She was not very beautiful. She had black hair and wore an apron every day. She never took it off. She made a reputation for herself that she had brought me up by hand. Having experienced how hard her hand was, and seeing that his husband Joe also experienced how hard her hand was, I resolved to think that she also brought Joe up by hand. Joe had curly hair and blue eyes. When I reached the house, Joe told me that my sister went to look for me. When she came in, she was full of anger. "Where have you been, you little monkey?" "I was in the churchyard." "Churchyard? If it wasn't for me, you'd be in that churchyard yourself. Who brought you up by hand?" "You did." She was really angry. She was preparing the butter and bread in her usual style, though. I knew I had to take some food for the man I met, so I put them in my pocket, though it was hard to do in the presence of Joe and my sister. As it was Christmas Eve, my sister made me stir the pudding for the next day. After I finished with it, Joe told me that another convict had escaped. As I asked questions to find out who had escaped and why and where he had escaped from, my sister became angry with me again and started to tell me that she had brought me up by hand, and that she didn't bring me up to find out about other people's lives. In the morning, when I went to the marshes, I saw a man as dark and gray as the man I met the previous day. So I went towards him, but he didn't seem to know me. My heart was beating as fast as it could. After a second look, I recognized the man I looked for. He was hugging himself and waiting for me. He seemed cold and hungry. I started to pack up the things I had brought for him. He took them and started to eat. He was eating in the same way that our dog did. I was glad he enjoyed them. When he asked me if I was deceiving him and if I had brought someone with me, I said that I hadn't. I mentioned the man whom I saw when I came to the marshes. He held my collar and stared at me. I was trembling. "He was dressed like you. His face was bruised," said I. After some time I left him. He was muttering something to his iron leg when I started to go. When I came into the kitchen, Mrs. Gargery saluted me by saying, "Where the hell have you been?" I said I had gone to listen to the carols. She complained as usual while making preparations for Christmas dinner. I was glad that there was no policeman waiting for me, because I had helped a convict. I had my breakfast with Joe. After breakfast, Joe and I got ready for church. However, Mrs. Gargery, even though she was a religious person, didn't come with us, as she had things to do at home. When the time for dinner came, everybody was ready at the table. Mr. Wopsle, the church clerk, Mr. and Mrs. Hubble, and Uncle Pumblechook were our guests. "Mrs. Joe," said Uncle Pumblechook, "I have brought you a bottle of sherry wine and a bottle of port wine." Mrs. Joe thanked him in her usual phony style. "Oh, Uncle Pumblechook, this is kind." We used to dine in our kitchen for special occasions. I was rarely allowed to speak among them. It was when they told me to be grateful to who brought me up by hand that I was included into the speeches. The dinner was going on. When Mrs. Joe offered Uncle some brandy, everything seemed to be all right. But when he drank the brandy, he cried, "Tar!" I had filled the bottle with tar. My sister was amazed, but they went on having dinner. It was when some soldiers came into our house that my heart was beating as fast as it could. I was sure that they would find out about the fact that I helped the convict. "Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen," said one of them. "I would like to see the blacksmith that lives here." "Why do you want him?" asked my sister. "Well, miss, there is a small mending job." So he talked about their problem. Joe looked at him and said that it would take 2 hours. "All right," said the man. "How far are you from the marshes?" "Just 1 mile," replied my sister. "Good. We will be close to them." "The convicts?" asked Mr. Wopsle. "Yes, 2 convicts. We know that they are on the loose. Have any of you seen them?" Everybody said no except me. No one thought of me. After Joe was through with their work, I was asked to go with them to the marshes to catch the convicts. I was afraid that the convict would recognize me, and so he did. They had found the food I had taken to him. "I can't live without eating something," said my convict. "Where did you get the food from?" asked one of the soldiers. I stole it." "You know where?" "From a blacksmith's house." The soldier looked at Joe and asked, "Did your wife miss anything at home, like pie?" "Well, yes." "Oh, so you are that blacksmith," said my convict. "I am sorry I ate your food." "Well, it's okay. You mustn't die from hunger." They took them into the boat and they went away. We all returned home. When we told my sister that the convict had taken the pies from our house, my sister was very surprised. Chapter 2. The SATIS House. I started to work with Joe. At the same time, I attended Mr. Wopsle's great-aunt's evening school. She was a funny old woman who went to sleep from 6 to 7 every evening. Biddy helped her all the time. She was Mr. Wopsle's great-aunt's granddaughter. She was an orphan like me, and she was helping me learn the alphabet. One night, I wrote a letter to Joe as following. "My dear Joe, I hope you are right well. I hope I shall soon be 40. You, Jonathan, we should be glad, and when I pregnant to you, Joe, what larks, and believe me in FX and Pip." I wrote it even though I didn't need to, as we were alone. When he took it, his eyes were wide open. "Pip, you are a scholar!" "I'd like to be." He tried to read what I had wrote. At that moment, he had told me that he had never gone to school, and told me the reason. My father was an alcoholic and wasn't kind to us. My mother and I ran away from home. Then he found us and hammered us. These were obstacles for my education, Pip, so I started to work. And I met your sister. She is a fine figure of a woman, Pip. Even though I didn't agree with him, I told him I appreciated that he thought so. My sister used to help Mr. Pumblechook with the shopping. It was one of those shopping days. After they came home, Mr. Pumblechook informed me that I was to visit Miss Havisham, a lady who lived uptown. We talked on the matter a little. She was a very rich woman in town. Then I went to sleep, thinking about how I would do it in Miss Havisham's house. The next day, after breakfast, Mr. Pumblechook and I went on our way to Miss Havisham's house. On the way, he asked me multiplication problems. 7 times 9, boy? I could not answer naturally, as I was hungry and it was a different place for me. But he asked them until we got there, and even when we appeared in front of the house. There, a beautiful young lady opened the door and asked us our names. "This is Pip," said Mr. Pumblechook. She let me in, and she stopped him at the gate. "Do you wish to see Miss Havisham?" asked the beautiful lady. "If she wishes to see me. But you see she doesn't." Her tone was so decisive that there could be no discussion for him to come in. She locked the door and took me to the room of Miss Havisham. Miss Havisham was sitting on an armchair. She was dressed with expensive clothes and jewels. Everything she wore was white, and she had only 1 shoe on. She was rather like an old bride. She told me to go closer to her. She put her hands on her bosom's left side and said, "Do you know what I touch here?" "Yes, ma'am." "What do I touch?" "Your heart." "It's broken." She emphasized the word so much that I thought about what she meant. "I'm tired. I want to play." "Play cards with Estella," she said. She called Estella, but Estella didn't seem to be happy. "Play cards with him? He is a common boy." And I think I heard Miss Havisham say, "You can break his heart," in her ear. So we sat down to play cards. This was when I recognized that everything in the room had stopped. The clocks had stopped at 20 minutes to 9. 1 shoe was on the dressing table, and it had never been worn, After playing cards, Miss Havisham remarked, "You say nothing about her." "I don't want to say anything." "Say it in my ear." "I think she is very proud." "What else?" "She is very pretty." "What else?" "She is very insulting." "What else?" "I'd like to go home." "You shall go soon. Now play the game." After the game, Miss Havisham told me to come after 6 days, and Estella took me to the gate. I cried there, but I thought she didn't see. She kept being proud and insulting. I left the SATIS house and went on my way home, thinking about how common and uneducated I was. When I reached home, my sister asked several questions about my visit to the SATIS house. Not only her, but also Mr. Pumblechook was very eager to learn what had happened there. "Tell me what she's like," he asked. "She's tall and dark," I told her. For some reason, I didn't want to tell them the truth. What was she doing? She was sitting in a black coach. What happened there? We ate cake and drank wine in gold plates. There were also 4 dogs inside. Have you ever seen her in her black velvet coach, Uncle? No, I've never seen her face. Really? We were surprised. Tell us more, they said to me. We all played flags, I said, and we waved our swords. They were really amazed. They were sure that Miss Havisham would certainly do some favor for me. Later on, Mr. Pumblechook left the house, and I wanted to speak to Joe. Joe, do you remember what I have told you about Miss Havisham's house? Yes, Pip, it's wonderful. Joe, it was all a lie. What? Yes, Joe, it's not true. But not all of it, right? All of it. She wasn't sitting in a black coach. There were no dogs. We didn't play flags, and we didn't eat cake on golden plates. Pip, it's terrible. Why did you do it? I don't know. I feel miserable, Joe. There was a girl named Estella. She was very beautiful and proud, but she told me that I am common and I have coarse hands. I wish I wasn't so common. No, Pip, you are a scholar, aren't you? You can write very well. I can't. What I wrote is nothing, Joe. Please don't be angry with me about the lies. No, I am not angry with you, but please don't do it again, okay, my son? When I went to bed, I thought about Joe's advice and how Joe and my sister sat in the kitchen. Then I thought about Miss Havisham and Miss Estella and how they didn't sit in the kitchen. Maybe they had never gone to the kitchen in their house. The next morning, I decided to get some help from Biddy to improve myself. The education in Mr. Wopsel's great-aunt's house was not going on well. The children were eating apples and throwing them everywhere. They were shouting and crying until Biddy came in and made them shut up. I knew it would be hard to be uncommon under these circumstances, so Biddy helped me outside of school, not there. There was a public house in the village, and Joe used to go there. My sister sent me to call Joe home. When I arrived, Joe was smoking with Mr. Wopsel and a stranger. The stranger invited me to sit next to him, but I sat next to Joe. He asked my name, and he asked if I was Joe's son or his nephew. Joe said that I was none of them. He was a strange man. When I saw him stirring his drink with a tool, I was shocked. It was the tool I had given to the convict I met by the sea. He had given me 2 pounds, which I gave to Joe afterwards. When we came home, I was still in shock. I thought about Miss Havisham's house and my next visit to her on Wednesday, but in my dream, I saw the tool coming through the door toward me, but I didn't see who was holding it. I screamed like mad and woke up. Chapter 3. I go to the SATIS house no more. On the day of my visit, I went to the SATIS house, and Estella opened the gate like before. She took me to another part of the house this time. After waiting some time, I was allowed to go to the room which was full of ladies and one gentleman. They were speaking and laughing. Estella came close to me and asked, "Am I pretty?" "Yes, very pretty." "Am I insulting?" "Not so much as you were last week." "Not so much?" "No." Being dissatisfied with my reply, she slapped me on the face and asked again, "What do you think of me now, you common monster?" "I won't tell you." "Will you tell me upstairs?" "No." "Why don't you cry again?" "I will never cry for you in my life," I replied, which was a mistake, as I would cry for her for a lifetime. When we entered into the group, a man asked who I was, and Estella replied, "A boy." "Are you from this town?" "Yes." "Behave yourself, boy." He frowned at me, and then he let me go. I was glad that he did. I went next to Miss Havisham. We played cards again. Later on, Miss Havisham took me to a place where a big table was located. She told me that it was the table which she would be put on when she was dead. Then she showed me something with the cobwebs on it. I couldn't guess what it was. Finally, she said that it was a bride cake of hers. After taking my time in the house, I saw a young man staring at me in the garden. He invited me to a fight. I was afraid of him, but I fought with him and won the battle, though. When the time came for me to leave, Estella told me that I could kiss her on the cheek. I kissed her and thought that it was a kiss given instead of money, and that it wasn't an important kiss for her. I had stayed there for a long time that when I reached home it was already dark. My mind was occupied by the fight I made with the young gentleman. The more I thought about it, the more I became anxious that they would punish me for knocking him down. I thought about the jails and so on. I was going to the SATIS house periodically. The more we got to know each other, the more Miss Havisham asked me questions. I was hoping that she would help me be a gentleman and improve myself, until I recognized that she preferred that I stayed in ignorant. She didn't give me any help or money, except my daily dinner. Estella never told me to kiss her again, and Miss Havisham kept asking me if she was prettier than before. She was indeed. Biddy became my close friend. I confided in her more than I did in others, even Joe. As time passed by, I grew tall, as Miss Havisham pointed out. I was old enough to be apprenticed to Joe. One day, she asked me the name of the man who I would be apprenticed to, and told me to come together with him. When I reached home, I delivered the message to Joe. My sister cried and asked if we thought what she was. Was she a doormat under our feet? She sent us out of the house. As it was very cold, we ventured to enter the house. This time she asked Joe, "Why didn't you marry a slave?" Joe didn't answer, poor man. The next day, seeing Joe with his Sunday clothes on wasn't pleasing to me, but I couldn't tell him that he looked better in his working clothes. My sister declared that her plan was to be left at Uncle Pumblechook's place and be called back after we took our time with our fine ladies. We left her and reached the house. Estella opened the gate as usual, but she didn't seem to recognize us. When we entered the house of Miss Havisham, Joe got very excited. He hadn't calmed down yet when Miss Havisham asked if he was my sister's husband, so he addressed me instead of her. "Yes, Pip, I am your sister's husband." "Do you intend to make him your apprentice? Is it so, Mr. Gargery?" "You don't have to be my apprentice if you don't want, Pip." "Has he ever made objections?" "You haven't made any, Pip." "Do you want any premium with the boy?" Joe wasn't giving answers in the right way. He was talking, but no one could make a point from his speech. I warned him that he should give the right answers. He still couldn't make up his mind, I guess. Miss Havisham looked in a way that she had understood what he is, and gave me £25. Then said, "Goodbye, Pip," and told Estella to take us out. "Am I to come again, Miss Havisham?" "No, Mr. Gargery is your master now." When we went to take my sister from Uncle Pumblechook's place, she asked about the visit. We told her that Miss Havisham sent her regards to her. I was very disappointed that Miss Havisham had no intention to make me a gentleman. I didn't want to work with Joe, though. I used to like it, but not now. It is a terrible feeling to feel ashamed of home. I would not have Miss Havisham and Estella see our house in any case. This house seems to be worse than ever, and I would not like to work as Joe's apprentice, but I don't want Joe to know this. He is a good man. Chapter 4. Estella is grown up. I grew older and became too big for Mr. Wopsel's great-aunt's school, and Biddy had taught me everything she knew. I was trying to teach Joe what I had learnt. I wanted him to be better. We were studying on the marshes on Sundays. Nevertheless, Joe never remembered anything on next Sunday. It had been a long time since I had last seen Miss Havisham, so I suggested to Joe that I should visit Miss Havisham. He didn't agree with me, for the reason that she would think that I'd want something from her. I resolved to go there anyway. In the SATIS house, Miss Havisham was sitting in her place as usual. She asked me if I would want anything from her. I declared that I wanted to visit her and tell her that I was doing all right in my apprenticeship. "You're looking for Estella, no?" I was looking around indeed. "She's abroad," said she. Do you feel that you've lost her?" She seemed to utter those words with great enjoyment. When the gate was closed on me, our house seemed to me worse than ever. It was when I entered the home that I learnt my sister had been attacked. She had become a woman without sense then. She didn't talk to us and didn't understand anything we said to her. The attack had made her like that. It was terrible. The attacker hadn't taken anything from the house. My sister still could not talk. She drew something on paper. It was a T, which looked like a hammer and caused us to think that the attacker was Orlick, who was Joe's worker. We called him to visit my sister so that my sister would show a reaction to him, but when he came, my sister seemed to be happy to see him. He had made the attack still a secret, and my sister kept drawing T's on the paper. On my birthday, I visited Miss Havisham, as she demanded my last visit. Estella wasn't there, but Miss Havisham mentioned her in the same way. My visit lasted a few minutes. She tried to give me some money. When I rejected it, she asked me if I wanted it for, so I had no choice but to take it. Biddy was growing up too. Her hair became longer and she got taller. I suggested walking with her through the marshes. I wanted to speak to her. "Biddy, I want to be a gentleman." "If I were you, I wouldn't want to be. Aren't you happy?" "No, Biddy, I don't like my life. I am not satisfied with my life, and with my coarse hands and being uncommon." She suddenly looked at me. "It's a very rude thing to say. Who said it?" "The beautiful young lady in Miss Havisham's house. She is the most beautiful girl I have ever seen." "Do you want to be a gentleman to gain her?" she asked. "I don't know." Biddy was a wise girl. She put her hand on mine and patted me on the shoulder. "I am glad for one thing, that you confided in me." "Biddy," I cried, "I will always tell you everything. Till you're a gentleman." She was never insulting. When we were on the way home, Orlick appeared. "Where are you two going?" Biddy told me she didn't like him. It was because Orlick liked her. After that day, I kept an eye on Orlick. I didn't like the idea that Orlick was after her. Chapter 5. I look for my benefactor. I was in the 4th year of my apprenticeship to Joe. There had occurred a murder, and Mr. Wopsle was reading it from a magazine in the public house. A strange man showed himself and started to ask questions to him. His questions were about law. He was talking in a serious and accusing way, and he made Mr. Wopsle feel bad. Then he asked for me by saying, "I've heard there is a boy who is an apprentice." I told him it was me. By that time, I recognized that he was one of the men I met in the SATIS house. We went to our house. In the house, he talked to Joe and asked if Joe would want anything over me, in case I get money from somewhere. I thought that my dreams had come true, that Miss Havisham had left me a fortune. Then the man, who introduced himself as Mr. Jaggers, talked to me in law matters. He informed that the person who'd leave me a fortune did not wish to be known. He also informed me that I was to go to London and be educated there like a gentleman. In the evening, everybody was sad. I was feeling that I was too good for that place, and that it is luck and right for me to leave it. However, I felt in despair to leave them. In the morning, the life seemed brighter to me than ever. Joe and Biddy were pleasant to me, but they only talked about my leaving when I did. I demanded something from Biddy, which was very important for me. I demanded that she'd give lessons to Joe when I'm gone, but she seemed to reject my demand. "Do you think that he needs that?" I was very angry with her. After that, I took my way to order clothes for me to wear in London. I went to the shop and talked to Mr. Trabb, the shopkeeper. "I'm going to London, for I have gained a good fortune, and I want to have some clothes to wear there, with ready money." I knew he would not give attention to me in the shop, so I added this detail. His eyes were wide open, and he gave all his attention to me. I selected the clothes. After ordering them, I went to have dinner with Mr. Pumblechook. He was impatient to see me. He behaved with great respect. I stated I would like to have my new clothes brought to his home. After dinner, I went to the SATIS house for a last goodbye. "Miss Havisham, I have come into a great fortune, and I am grateful for it." Aye, I have heard it from Mr. Jaggers. Are you going tomorrow?" "Yes." "You are adopted by a rich person?" "Yes, Miss Havisham." "You don't know his name?" "No, Miss Havisham." "Is Mr. Jaggers your guardian?" "Yes, Miss Havisham." "Well, goodbye, Pip." I knelt down and kissed her hand. It was my last visit before I went to London. The next morning, I got prepared and started for London. Joe and Biddy seemed in despair for my leaving. I was sorry for them, but I had had the chance for a good future and would not like to miss it. My journey to London lasted 5 hours. I found Mr. Jaggers' house. There was a clerk in the house, and he told me that Mr. Jaggers would like me to wait in his room until he came. After I waited for a time, I got bored and went outside to take a look. There were several people waiting for him outside, and they were talking about him. I was introduced to Mr. Jaggers' clerk, named WEMMICK. He was a strange man. Mr. WEMMICK had bright and black eyes and wide lips. "Have you never been to London before?" "No," I said. "You must know it very well." "Well, yes." "Is it a wicked place?" I asked. My real intention was to show that I had some knowledge about London. "You may be robbed, cheated, and murdered in London." We were going to meet my tutor, Mr. Pocket. He took me to his place and left me. When I entered their house, I met Mr. Pocket, Jr. He was a nice young gentleman. He behaved in a cheerful manner. I was to stay with him at night. I got the feeling that we would be real friends. His face wasn't new to me. Suddenly, he looked at me and said, "Oh, you're the boy who won the fight. And you are the boy who lost it." We couldn't believe that we met each other after years. "You hadn't come into your fortune then, had you?" "No," I answered. We talked about Miss Havisham and Estella. From his speech I learnt that Estella was her adopted daughter. He was surprised that I didn't know this. He had an easy way to talk. That's why I didn't hesitate to tell that I would be glad if he warned me whenever I did anything in the wrong way. "With pleasure," he said, and he told me he would like to be called by his first name. Then he suggested to call me Handel, and I accepted it. He knew almost everything about Miss Havisham. Miss Havisham had a bad childhood. Her mother died when she was a baby, and her father denied her. His father was a rich man, though. "Was she an only child?" I asked. "No, she had a half-brother. Her father married her cook, but he did hide this fact as he was a proud man. They had a son. When the father died, he left most of his fortune to Miss Havisham, and a small part to his son. Then she loved a man, and they would get married. The man made her buy the share of her half-brother, and he didn't come up on the wedding day, but sent a letter to her." "Which she received at 20 to 9? I asked. I remembered the clocks in the house. "Yes, exactly. She stopped all the clocks, and hasn't seen the sunlight since then." "When did she adopt Estella?" "Well, I don't know. There has been an Estella since I know Miss Havisham." Later on, I was introduced to the whole family of Herberts. Her mother was the woman I knew in the SATIS' house. She wasn't a warm woman, though. There were 2 more students at home, like me. They were called Bentley, Drummel, and Startop. Chapter 6. WEMMICK'S Castle. Mr. Pocket, Herbert's father, said that he was glad to see me. He was a young-looking man and seemed quite natural. He talked to me a little and asked his wife if she had welcomed me. She looked up from her book and said yes. Then she asked me if I had liked the taste of orange flower water. I was going to live with them, so Mr. Pocket showed me my room. It was a nice and comfortable room. Mrs. and Mr. Pocket seemed to be in somebody else's hands. I wondered who had possessed their lives and let them live there, until I understood that that power was the servants. They had a neighbor by the name of Mrs. Coiler, whom I took out to dinner one evening. Mrs. Pocket was a woman obsessed with being noble. She always read the books about aristocracy all the time, and she liked people who thought that she was noble. The cook had done the wrong things in the kitchen, and at dinner time she wasn't angry with her because she had once said that she believed that Mrs. Pocket was born to be like a duchess. I established myself in London in a few days. Mr. Pocket knew about my planned future more than me, and told me that I wasn't to have any job. I told Mr. Jaggers that I needed some money. "How much do you want?" "I don't know." "Come on, 50 pounds? "Oh, not that much. 5 pounds? "Well, more than that." "Okay, 20 pounds. Wemmick, take Mr. Pip's written order and give him 20 pounds. He never laughed. I could not know what to make of his manners. When Wemmick and I went outside, I told this to him. "Oh, tell him that. He will take it as a compliment. He is professional." He offered me to see the law office, in which other clerks work too. After taking a tour in the office, we went to watch Jaggers in a case in the court. As far as I understood, Jaggers is really successful when it comes to law cases. Bentley Drummel was a heavy man in figure and comprehension. Startop had a spoilt childhood during which he was kept at home instead of going to school. They were strange people. but Herbert and I had become close friends. Wemmick asked me if I would mind walking down to Walworth, where his house was located on. We were on the way to his home. He also asked if I'd mind his aged parents. I told him what politeness required. "Haven't you had dinner with Mr. Jaggers yet?" "Not yet." "I've heard that he would call you and your friends tomorrow, 3 of them." "Yes." His house was a little wooden cottage in the midst of the gardens. It had Gothic windows. "At 9 o'clock every night, a gun fires," he said. "There are my pigs, rabbits, and fowls at the back. I am my own engineer, my own carpenter, my own gardener. It's a good thing, you know. Well, do you mind being introduced to the aged parent?" "How are you an aged parent?" "All right, John, all right," said the old man. "This is Mr. Pip. I wish you could hear his name. Nodded him Pip. He likes it very much." "This is a nice place of my son, sir," he said, while I nodded as hard as I could. "Pip, I know it's strange to you, but would you nod again? You don't know how much he likes it." We sat down and talked a little bit. He stated that it had taken him years to build that place. "Is it your own place?" "Yes. I am sure Mr. Jaggers admires it." "He has never seen it, Pip. He has never seen the house or the aged parent. I don't like to blend my office life and private life." He was really different than the Wemmick in the office. He was up early in the morning, and I am afraid I heard him cleaning my boots. From the window I saw him nodding at the aged parent. He seemed very sensitive at those moments, but on our way to the office he became drier and harder. I had an invitation as Wemmick had told me, and I got the chance to compare my guardian's house with Wemmick's. He was washing his hands in his room when he called me and invited me for dinner, with my friends. However, then he offered to take me that evening alone. I was glad that the others wouldn't come. Dinner was prepared in the best room. I also saw the dressing room and his bedroom. He said that he didn't use the rooms more than we saw. There was a bookcase in the room. The books were about crime, evidence, law, and such things. The bell rang and Bentley and Startop appeared. "Pip, who's the spider?" "Spider?" "The blotchy fellow." "That's Bentley Drummle, and the one with the nice face is Startop." "Bentley Drummle, huh? I like his look." The housekeeper entered the room and put the dishes on the table. Then she touched Mr. Jaggers on the arm, meaning that the supper was ready. On the table, Drummle and Startop sat next to my guardian. There was a fine fish, wine, salad, and such things for supper. The housekeeper changed the plates and put new food on the table. She behaved in a hesitated manner. While she was in the room, Mr. Jaggers asked us if we wanted to see a real wrist. Then he put his hand upon the woman's. "Mr. Jaggers, please, no," said the woman. "Come on, Molly." She showed her wrists. "This woman has the power which no man can have." She looked at us one by one. "Molly, you can go now. You have been admired," said he. She went out of the room. "We must break up at 9:30, gentlemen. I am glad to see you all. Mr. Drummle, I drink to you." Later on, he declared that it was 9:30. We all left the house. Chapter 7. I mention my love to Herbert. My dear Mr. Pip, I write this letter by request of Mr. Gargery to let you know that he is going to London with Mr. Wopsle, and they would be glad to see you. They will arrive at Barnard's Hotel Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock. Please inform if not agreeable. Your sister is the same as when you left. No more, dear Mr. Pip. From your obliged and affectionate servant, Biddy. P.S. Pip, I hope and I am sure that you will see him. He is a worthy man. I read all sentences to him except this sentence. I received the letter on Monday morning. What I felt was like this. I wasn't so glad to see him, nor was I disturbed. But to tell the truth, I was glad that he was coming to the hotel I was staying, and he wouldn't come across with Bentley Drummle, as Joe's behaviors were odd, and they would seem odd than ever in London. I was in my room when I felt his fingers on the nameplate on the door. Then I heard his breath. He came in. "Joe? How are you, Joe?" "Pip, how are you, Pip?" With his good honest face, he looked at me and shook my both hands up and down. "Give me your hat, Joe." But he didn't hear it and carried his hat as if it was a nest carrying eggs in it. "Pip, you have grown up." "And you look wonderful, Joe." "Thanks. Your sister is the same. She hasn't changed since you last saw her. And Mr. Wopsle is play-acting in church now." "Really? Did you see his play?" "Yes, I did." Joe's ghost-seeing face informed me that Herbert had entered the room. I introduced them to each other. "Do you take tea or coffee?" asked Herbert. "I'll take which is agreeable for you." "What about coffee?" "Well, I'd like to have tea." "Okay. When did you come to town, Mr. Gargery? Was it yesterday afternoon?" "Have you seen anything in London?" "Well, yes." After taking a short time, Herbert left the room. "Now we are alone, sir," began Joe. "Joe," I interrupted, "how can you call me sir? I must call you like this, I guess." "No, Joe. Why?" "Anyway, Miss Havisham wishes to speak to you." "To me?" "Yes. I think Miss Estella has come back home." He rose from the chair. "But you are not going now, are you, Joe? You will have dinner." "I must go now." He went out. I ran after him after I recovered myself from shock, but he was gone. I knew I had to go to town the next day. We started for the coach with Herbert. Near the coach, I heard the men utter the name convict. I was going to get in the same coach with convicts. "Do you mind them?" asked Herbert. "Oh, no. But you look like you don't like them." "Well, yes, I don't like them, but it's okay for me to get in." I got in the coach anyway, and it started. "Goodbye, Handel," shouted Herbert as we moved. The convict men were talking, murmuring. One of them was the man who gave me money in the public house of town. I was shocked, but he didn't recognize me as I had changed since I was a child. As I listened to men while they talked, I learned that the man whom I had helped in the marshes had sent that money for me. I was trembling for the fear of being disclosed as the helper of that man. I got off at the first stop and went to a hotel. The coffee room was empty. As I sat down at a table, the waiter brought a newspaper which informed that Uncle Pumblechook was my benefactor. It was something hard to believe, so I thought it was a wrong written article, and I thought my benefactor was Miss Havisham. I woke up the next morning, but as it was early I didn't visit Miss Havisham, nor Joe, so I took my time thinking about my patroness. I was sure she had planned to bring us together, Estella and me. I loved Estella simply because I found her irresistible. After taking my time, I went to the SATIS house and rang the bell. "Orlick!" I screamed. It was a shock for me to see him open the door. "Ah, come in." I did. "Am I expected to see Miss Havisham?" "I don't know," he said. I went upstairs anyway. There was the lady whom I met in that house years ago. She was a lady called Sarah Pocket. I asked her how she was doing. Then I recognized another lady in the room. She lifted her eyes and looked at me. It was then that I understood she was Estella. She was more beautiful than before. "Do you think that she has changed so much, Pip?" asked Miss Havisham. I didn't expect to see her today, Miss Havisham." "Has he changed, Estella?" asked she, playing with Estella's hair. "Yes. He is less coarse and common, isn't he?" She laughed. "I'd stay there all day long and return to my hotel in the evening. Then I would go back to London the next day. Miss Havisham sent us to the garden so that we would have a walk. After the walk, we returned to the house and sat for dinner. The Jaggers would be with us, too, for the dinner. Estella was a real lady by then. After dinner, I went to my bed and thought about Estella and my love for Estella. When I was dressing the next day to go to London, I told my guardian that I was annoyed by Orlick's working for Miss Havisham. He stated that we would send him away. We took the midday coach. In the breakfast, I was afraid that I would come across Mr. Pumblechook, so I preferred to take a walk. I was in a way famous in the city for my inheriting a fortune. Trabb's boys saw me and behaved to me in a humiliating manner. It was hard to bear it, though. When I arrived to London, I wanted to speak to Herbert. "Herbert," said I adore Estella." "Well?" He was talking easily again. "Herbert, you say well only?" "I mean, what next, Pip, because I know you love her." "How do you know it? I have never told you." "You didn't tell me either that you cut your hair, but I understand that, Pip. Your love for her is seen in your behaviors and speeches." I told him how I loved and adored her since I met her, and how desperate I was. What he told me was to detach myself from her. It was impossible for me. Then he told me about the girl he loved. "What's her name?" I asked. "Clara." "Does she live in London?" "Yes." We talked a bit about her and their marriage, which hadn't been planned yet by them. I had the tickets for Mr. Wopsle's play. We got prepared to see the play Hamlet. Mr. Wopsle and his play were really bad. The audience didn't seem to like it. He had got the name by Waldengarver when he would meet Herbert and me after the play. We dined together. During dinner, Mr. Wopsle talked about his terrible play and his acting. Chapter 8. First Meeting with Estella in London. One day I was busy with my books when I received a letter. There was no addressing word in the beginning of the letter like Dear Pip, Mr. Pip, Sir, or Pip. I am to come to London the day after tomorrow by the midday coach. I think it was settled that you should meet me. Miss Havisham sends her regards to you. Yours, Estella. If I had time, I would have ordered several suits and clothes, but I didn't. I couldn't eat anything, and I went down to spend some time until the coach which would bring her arrived. I saw Wemmick outside. He invited me to see the new gate. It was the prison in London. I accepted his offer. When we arrived there, he seemed to be well known among the prisoners. That was right, because going there often was a part of his business. In the prison, Wemmick was cold and dry, as he was in the office. I thought he was soft and sensitive only in his home, while he is with his aged parent. The time for Estella's arrival had come, so I went to wait for her coach. While I waited, I thought of her. I made a comparison between Estella and the jail. My mind and my heart had been prisoned in her. While I was in such thoughts, she appeared and waved to me. She was very pretty in her furred traveling dress. I'm going to Richmond. It's 10 miles from here. Take my purse and you will make the charges out of it. We must obey our rules, you and me. While she spoke like this, I hoped there was inner meaning in her words, you and me. She was laughing often instead of giving answers to my questions in her usual proud way. I took her to her hotel, then came back to the Herberts' house. As I grew older, my mind became busy with the fact that I had treated Joe and Biddy in a way that I shouldn't. I even thought that everything would be better if I hadn't seen her. Yet I could not take Estella out of my mind. Herbert and I were having great enjoyment from our lives. We were the members of a group called Finches of the Grove, in which we organized casual meetings and extremely expensive meals. All the members were young people who lived for entertainment. These occasions made us finish our money, though. We were making plans to deal with our debts when a letter was brought to me. It was a short one, and it was declaring that Mrs. Joe Gargery had passed away and that I was expected in the funeral on Monday. Chapter 9. My sister passes away. It was the first time that I had seen a dead person in my life. My sister's dead figure showed itself to me night and day. I was feeling like she'd come to the road, or in the room, or to another place. In the funeral, I went near Joe and said, "Dear Joe, how are you?" "Pip, my friend, you know her when she was a fine figure of a—" He held my hands and shut up. Biddy was looking very neat in her black dress. She was very helpful. Mr. Trabb told us to take our handkerchiefs out. We did, and put them on our faces. Everybody made couples. Joe and I, Biddy and Pumblechook, Mr. and Mrs. Hubble. The dead body of my sister was brought by the kitchen door. As we walked through the town to bury her, the townspeople admired us for the well-organized funeral. After the funeral, we dined coldly together. Joe, Biddy, and I. Joe was pleased when I asked if I could sleep in my room. "Biddy, you should have written me that she had died," said I. "Is that so, Mr. Pip? I'd have written if I thought so." "Biddy, I don't mean to be unkind, but I would like to know." As we walked, she didn't speak. "It must be hard for you to stay here. I've talked to Mrs. Hubble, and we will take care of Mr. Gargery for some time." "How did she die, Biddy?" "She was in a bad state. She said Joe while she was in bed. I brought Joe to her. She made signs that he sat down. Then she said pardon, and then Pip. She said nothing more, and we understood she was gone. I stated to her that I'd come and visit them quite often, but she didn't believe in me. She kept calling me Mr. Pip, which annoyed me so much. I left the town anyway and promised that I'd visit them often. Herbert and I went from bad to worse in financial matters. By the way, my 21st had come. As I would be 21, I was expecting to learn who my benefactor was. My guardian told me that he wanted to speak to me. "Have you anything to ask me?" "Yes, of course, several questions. But I know the rules, sir." "Ask them, please." "Will my benefactor be known today?" "Ask another." "Will I receive anything, sir?" "Yes, we must come to that point. I know you are in debt, and you don't know how much it is, do you?" "Well, no. And if you knew, you wouldn't tell me the amount. You would say it less. Anyway, please take this paper and open it." I took and opened it. "This is a banknote, sir, £500. It is a big amount of money, isn't it?" "Yes." Now, this big amount of money is yours. You will take this amount of money every year from WEMMICK until your benefactor is known to you. While I waited for Mr. Jaggers, as he was getting prepared for my birthday, I saw WEMMICK. I thought I had to get some information from him. I wanted to help Herbert in financial matters, and I asked WEMMICK questions on this issue. Then we dined all together, but it wasn't a happy day for me, as it was a guarded and unclear time then. On Sunday, I went to WEMMICK'S castle to take his advice. I rang the bell, but it was the aged parent who opened the door. He stated that WEMMICK had gone for a walk, and that he did this often, and so on. I nodded at him hardly, and we sat down by the fireside. "You know my son well, sir, huh?" "I've heard he is successful in his job," I nodded. "Is his business about law?" I nodded harder. "He was educated to be wine cooperator, but became a lawman." WEMMICK appeared at the door. There was a woman with him, named Miss Skiffins. After we ate our toasts, WEMMICK invited me to a walk with him. While walking, I had the chance to ask him questions again about how I could possibly help Herbert in financial matters. He was really changing while he was out of his work. What he advised was really interesting. He suggested that I give a man £100 per year, and he'd make Herbert his colleague. But Herbert would not know this. It was a good plan for me. We organized it so cleverly that Herbert didn't have the suspicion about the plan. It went all right. I was very happy because I had done something good for somebody. Chapter 10. I Meet My Benefactor. Something very important happened in my life, but before that I wanted to talk about Estella. She was living in the house of Mrs. Branley, the friend of Miss Havisham. She had too many admirers around her. Because of my jealousy, I thought everyone who went to that house was her admirer, but she had many real ones, though. "Pip, Miss Havisham wants to see me in the SATIS house, and you are to take me there, and bring me back if you will." When we arrived there, Miss Havisham's behaviors were odd as usual. She asked me, "Pip, how does she use you?" I guess it really pleased her to see me in such conditions. But this time Estella behaved different than the others. She wasn't acting in the way Miss Havisham wanted. She accused Miss Havisham of destroying her life, of shaping her in the way she liked. She said that she couldn't love anybody because she had educated her in a way that she would not love but hate. And Miss Havisham accused her of being proud and hard, but Estella stated that it was Miss Havisham herself who made her like this. This discussion was really annoying. That is why I could not sleep at night. I understood Miss Havisham also could not sleep because she was shouting with a candle in her hand. I also want to talk about what happened in the Finches of the Grove. I saw Bentley Jummel in one of the occasions. He tried to imply that he was in touch with Estella. "I know that lady," said Herbert. "So do I," said I, with a red face. "Oh, do you?" After some time, I saw Estella and Bentley in a dance occasion. When I told Estella to stay away from him, she got angry with me, but said that she was deceiving and playing with men, but that she had never done this to me. I had become 23 by then. As I had grown older, Mr. Pocket wasn't to be my tutor any more. I was living in the temple with Herbert. One night, a man came up and asked for a room. He had a strange face. He was about 60 years old and was a muscular man. I took him to my room. He was holding out his hands to me and looking at me. "What do you mean?" I asked. He stopped and said, "I'm very disappointed because you say this, but I don't blame you." I thought he was mad. After he spoke for a while, I understood who he was. He was the convict I had helped years ago. "You acted noble, my boy, and I have never forgotten you." From his manner, I understood that he was going to embrace me, and so I said, "Stay there. If you are grateful to me for I have saved your life, you didn't have to thank me. It wasn't necessary, but you must understand that." "What? What do I have to understand?" "That I am glad you are thankful to me, but our ways are different. You look wet and tired. Do you want to drink something before you go?" When I put his drink, I saw tears in his eyes. "I hope you don't think that I meant to be unkind. I am sorry if I was rude. How are you living?" asked I. "I am a sheep farmer, stock breeder," he replied. "Have you ever seen the messenger you sent me before?" "I don't think so." "He came faithfully and gave £2 as you sent them. I was poor then, you know. Now I am rich. Please let me pay it back." I took my purse out and put £2 on the table. May I ask how you have done well since we met there? I didn't know what to say. What property is that you received? I don't know. Whose property is it? I don't know. There must be a lawyer to take care of you. I guess his name starts with the letter J. Well, can it be Jaggers? And there must be another man by the name of WEMMICK. I was shocked. I could not speak. Yes, my dear boy, I promised myself that every coin I earned would be yours. I didn't buy anything for myself even, just to make a gentleman out of you, and I have made it. Have you ever thought that it was me? No, never. Was there anyone else? Who could there be? I prepared him Herbert's bed. My dreams were over. I was Miss Havisham's dear adopted son, and Estella wasn't meant for me. It was a disappointment for me. When I woke up, I was still afraid that he would be seen by someone else. The watchman had seen him. There was a man last night, sir. He asked for you. My uncle. Oh, really? So you saw him. Did you see the man with him? The man with him? Who was that? I don't know. He must have gone. I got rid of him and went to the room. I told him, the watchman, that you are my uncle. I don't even know how to call you. Oh, call me uncle. Do you have a new name? Yes, Provis. And what's your real name? Magwitch. Was there a man with you last night? I don't think so. Are you sure? Well, maybe there was. I didn't notice. Are you known in London? I hope not, he said. Pip, my boy, I want to stay with you and see how gentleman you are. I want to see you with horses. Your clothes must be clean. But I don't care for my clothes, Pip. You are more important than me. Stop, I said. I want to speak to you. What are your plans? How will you stay with me? Won't you be in danger with me? My boy, there is no danger for me. Who can know me except you, Jaggers and WEMMICK? What if somebody recognizes you in the street? I will disguise in hair and glasses. Well, okay, but please stay in my room. If somebody sees you, we will say you are my uncle, okay? All right. Then I went to have a talk with Mr. Jaggers. He seemed to know that I had learned the truth. I just want to know if this is all truth or not, I said. I have been told that my benefactor is Abel Magwitch. Yes, he is in New South Wales, but did you say told or informed? It is hard to communicate with a man from New South Wales. His words were unclear, so I left him. The next day, we decided to tell the story to Herbert, but of course we took his oath with the Bible. We sat down by the fire and told all the story to Herbert. He was really astonished. What is more, I saw my own feelings on his face. Look at here, Pip's friend. I know I'm low. I know this since I came here, so please don't think I will tell people what I have done for Pip. Certainly, said Herbert, but his mind seemed to be unclear. At midnight, I took him to Essex Street and waited until he closed the door. It was my first relief since he came. After leaving him, I returned to the temple. No one saw me going up. Herbert was sitting there. When I entered the room, he embraced me warmly. At that moment, I understood what a friend he was. He was full of emotion. What is to be done? I asked him. My poor Handel, he said. I can't think of it. Me too. He intends to buy horses and carriages for me. He must be stopped. You mean you can't accept them? How can I? Look at him. Herbert, I am afraid that he is attached to me. My poor Handel. He gave me so much until now. How much I owe him. And I am in debt. He has expectations about me. But, Herbert, I am fit for nothing. Well, don't say so. Tell me what I am fit for. I know one thing, being a soldier. We talked about the matter for a while. Then our topic was Provis. We were thinking it was best for him to leave England, for we didn't want him to be arrested. Handel, are you sure that you must break up with him? Yes. Look, we will send him away, but first you must go with him. Before that, we need to learn more about him. We decided to ask him questions in the morning, and he came in the morning for breakfast. He was full of plans for his gentleman. Before we talked, he took an oath from Herbert. Chapter 11. My Rebellion. Dear Pip and his friend, I am not going to tell you my life as a storybook. In short, my life was in jail and out of jail, in jail and out of jail, in jail and out of jail, and so on. I committed all crimes. I did everything, but I wasn't hung. I met a man by the name of COMPEYSON. He was a criminal like me, but his punishments were less than mine, because he knew how to show himself a good man. He was an educated man. Once he said to me, "You lose because of your look." "Yes," I said, "I have never been lucky." "Luck changes. Maybe yours is going to change," he said. "I hope so," replied I. Then he employed me in his business. His business was illegal. He had a friend called Arthur. COMPEYSON and Arthur worked together to get a rich lady's money. Arthur was living at the top of COMPEYSON's house. One night, he started to scream and said, "Sally, Sally, she's upstairs, she's up." COMPEYSON asked how she could go there, but Arthur didn't know. He said that she was sitting on the bed and her heart's blood was on the floor. He accused COMPEYSON of breaking her heart. COMPEYSON told his wife to go upstairs and told me to go with her. He was a coward. He was a man of injustice. I had taken my revenge years ago on the marshes. He had spoilt my life. Later, I saw Herbert writing something on a book and turning the book to me. What he wrote was, "Young Mr. Havisham was named Arthur and COMPEYSON was Miss Havisham's lover." I nodded at him. We said nothing and watched Provis smoking his pipe. If COMPEYSON was alive, I didn't know what would come next. I had said Herbert when we talked that night that I should go to see Miss Havisham and Estella before I go abroad. So I went to Richmond to see Estella, but she wasn't there. She was in the SATIS house as usual. I was surprised because she used to go there only with me. Anyway, then I decided to go to the country to see Joe and Miss Havisham. I went to the hotel which I stayed whenever I went to the country. But I saw there Bentley Drummle. We both pretended not to see each other, but it couldn't go forever, so we talked. "Oh, have you just come here?" he asked. "Well, yes. We were looking at each other's clothes." "Do you stay here long?" I asked. "Can't say. You?" "Can't say." "There are marshes, you know them?" he said and laughed. "They say they are out-of-the-way villages, little public houses. I want to see them. Waiter!" "Yes, sir." "Is my horse ready?" "Yes." "Good, but the lady won't ride today, and I won't have dinner because I will have dinner with the lady." After making a little speech with him that we shall not communicate with him, I left there and took my way to the SATIS house. Miss Havisham and Estella were in the room when I entered. Estella was knitting and Miss Havisham was sitting. They looked at me as I entered the room. I think that they saw a change in me. "What wind blows you here, Pip?" asked Miss Havisham. "Miss Havisham, I went to Richmond yesterday and saw that some wind blew Estella here." She was looking at me. "I have learned who my patron is. It won't make me popular. It is not a fortunate thing. But I can't say who it is. It's not my secret, but another person's secret." "Not your secret, but another person's? Well?" "Yes, Miss Havisham. When I first came here, I thought I had really come. But I think you brought me here as a kind of servant, and now I fell into a mistake. And you didn't want me that you weren't my boss. Was that kind?" "Who am I?" she cried. "Who am I that I should be kind?" Estella looked at her in surprise. I hadn't meant to say anything like that. "Miss Havisham, it's all right that I was paid for my visits. I don't mean to be thankless," I said to calm her down. "But I have been thrown among the people that you know." "They were your friends, too." "No, they looked so, but Mr. Pocket and Herbert were my real friends. They may be from the same blood, but not from the same nature." "What do you want for them?" "I want you to support Herbert in business without letting him know. I began it 2 years ago. But now I can't go on because of the secret I mentioned to you." "What else, Pip?" I turned to Estella this time. "And Estella, you know I love you. I know I had to say this long ago, but I couldn't. I thought that Miss Havisham wanted to bring us together, but it seems I was wrong. It seems that while she was mending her heart, she forgot mine." Miss Havisham put her hand on her heart. "Pip," said Estella, "when you say you love me, I understand the words, but nothing more. It is not a feeling that I know." "Why, Estella?" "This is my nature. I was brought up like this. Estella, is it true that Bentley Drummle is here for you, and you ride with him and have dinner with him?" "It is true." "You can't marry him, Estella." "I will marry him. I have to marry him, but it is not my own wish. Pip, you will forget me in a week, believe me. Estella, you are part of my existence. I will always love you." Estella was surprised. I was so unhappy that I felt miserable. Then I decided to return to the temple. It was very late when I arrived there. At the gate, I received a note saying, "Don't go home." It was WEMMICK'S handwriting. After having the note, I immediately left the temple and went to the hotel room. My mind was complexed. I was thinking about the note I had received. I got up early in the morning. I would go to the house of WEMMICK. I arrived there at 8 o'clock. He was making tea for himself. "Hello, Pip. You came home, huh?" "Yes, but I returned." "That's all right. I left notes to each gate of the temple. I will go and take all the notes back." "Oh, okay." He was preparing a meal for the aged parent while we talked. He continued talking. "They say a person is not where he is supposed to be, and that leads them to watch you and the temple." He meant Provis, I guess, and the person who was watching could be COMPEYSON. "Do you know a man by the name of COMPEYSON?" He nodded. "Is he living?" He nodded again. "Is he in London?" And he nodded again. "Now, questioning is over," he said. "Look, Pip, I've talked to Herbert, and we have some decisions about Provis. We thought it would be better to take him to Clara's house. Her house is by the river. There will be no problem." I thanked him several times. As he had to go to work, he offered me to stay with the aged parent all day. Chapter 12. COMPEYSON comes up. I went to visit MAGWITCH at Clara and her father's house. When I arrived, Herbert was there. He introduced me to Clara, his fiancée. She was a sweet woman. She behaved in a warm way, even though it was the first time we met. Then I met her father, a man who seemed to live on drink and sleep. He was named Old Barley. It was surprising to learn that Provis, or Magwitch, was using a new name for himself. That name was Mr. Campbell. Before I go, Herbert and I decided that I had better buy a boat and sail on the river every day, so there would be the impression that I sail every day as a sport, and I would be able to see Provis every day without creating suspicion. Some weeks passed without any change. I was in a strange condition. I needed money, but I even didn't think about wanting money from my patron. I had the impression that Estella and Bentley had married, so I didn't read newspapers and told Herbert not to mention Estella when he was with me. One day, I decided to go on to Mr. Wapple's play. He was very bad, as he was in the previous play. But there was something important in that. He was acting on the scene, but suddenly looked at my direction in amazement. I thought he was looking at me, but he seemed to remember something that happened in the past and seemed confused. After the play, he was waiting for me at the door. "How are you?" I said, shaking hands with him. "I saw that you saw me." "Oh yes, I saw you, of course. But who else was there?" "Who else?" "It's very strange, but I can swear I saw him. I was waiting for him to explain." "Pip, I thought that he could be with you until I saw that you didn't know he was there. He was sitting behind you like a ghost." "Pip, I will tell you who it was. You remember when you were a child, on Christmas Day, some soldiers had come and asked for Joe? You remember?" "Yes, I remember." "And you remember that they were after 2 convicts, and we helped them find the convicts, and you were there too?" "Yes, I remember very well." "Pip, one of them sat behind you tonight. I saw him over your shoulder." "What? Really? Which one did you see?" "The one who had been molded. I swear it was him." "This is very strange," I said. I was in shock. COMPEYSON sitting behind me like a ghost created terror in my mind. I asked questions about him to WEMMICK, like how was he dressed? What was he like? I left him and reached the temple. Herbert had come in before me. I told him about what had happened. We decided to be cautious. I had left my boat below the bridge, and I was thinking about what to do, when a hand was put on my shoulder. "Where are you going?" asked Mr. Jaggers. "Well, I don't know. Will you have dinner?" "Yes, I will." "And will you have it with somebody?" "No." "Then come and have dinner with me." I'd say I can't come, but when he stated that WEMMICK would come too, I accepted his offer. During the dinner, WEMMICK behaved cold and dry, in the way he did when he was in the office. Whenever he raised his head from the table, he looked at Jaggers. "Did you give Miss Havisham's note to Pip?" asked Mr. Jaggers. "No, sir. Here it is. She wants to see you about the business matter you mentioned to her. Will you go?" "Yes, sir, I will." "When?" "Tomorrow, I guess." "So, Pip, Bentley has won the battle. Ah, the stronger wins, but you have to know who is stronger first." "Surely," I said. My face and my heart were burning. Then he suddenly said, "Molly, Molly, Molly, how slow you are today." She murmured something and stood there. An action of her hands drew my attention. Mr. Jaggers asked why I had looked at that direction. I told him that the subject we are talking about made me feel bad, but it wasn't that. The action of her hands was like knitting, and I had seen that action recently on somebody else. I looked at Molly and her hands, her hair, her face. They were like the hands, hair, and face of somebody else that I knew very well. I was certain that she was Estella's mother. After dinner, Wemmick and I left Mr. Jagger's house together. Warm and happy Wemmick was back again. I asked him if she ever saw Mrs. Bentley Drummle, Miss Havisham's adopted daughter, Estella. No, he answered shortly. Well, Wemmick, do you remember telling me to notice the housekeeper of Jagger's? Yes. You called her a wild, tamed beast. Why did you say so? Can you tell me her story? Well, okay. This woman Molly used to love a man, and they had a child, but the woman learnt that her lover had another woman, and killed the woman. And it is told that she killed her child, too. But Mr. Jaggers became her lawyer, and advocated for her. So she wasn't sentenced, and started working as Mr. Jagger's housekeeper. May I ask the sex of the child? I demanded. It was a girl. Chapter 13. Miss Havisham Regrets. I put Miss Havisham's note in my pocket and went to the SATIS' house. When she saw me, she slowly looked at me and said, Is it real? It is me, Pip. I took your note yesterday and didn't want to lose time. Thank you, thank you. She continued, I thought about the matter you mentioned to me, and I want to show you that I am not made of stone. Maybe you believe that there is a heart inside me. Please tell me what you want for him. I told her about sending money to HERBERT without any knowledge of his business. And how much do you want? It was hard to say, but I said it anyway. 900 pounds. Will you keep the secret? Certainly. Are you very unhappy now? Yes, but the reason is the secret I mentioned to you last week. It is very noble of you telling me that, but this is what I do for your friend. Tell me what I can do for you, Pip. Nothing. I thank you for asking. She took some papers and signed them. My financial matters are kept by Mr. Jaggers, but if you want, I will give you the money myself. No, it's okay for me. My name is on the first leaf. If you write under my name, I forgive her, it will be... Oh, Miss Havisham, of course I will write. I have made many mistakes and never thanked you. I want forgiveness. She turned her face, and, it is bitter to say, but she kneeled down at my feet and cried. I had never seen her like that. Ooh, she cried, what have I done? What have I done? Miss Havisham, I care for nothing except Estella. Is she married now? Yes. Then she started again. What have I done? What have I done? I didn't know how to calm her down. Until you spoke to Estella last week, I didn't know what I did. Your speech made me recognize my mistake. Pip, my dear, when she first came to me, I only wanted to save her. But as she grew older and more beautiful, I used her to take my revenge. If you know all the story... No, Miss Havisham, I don't know all of it. Would you please tell me what has happened? Years ago, I told Mr. Jaggers that I wanted a girl, and he brought her to me, and I called her Estella. She only knows I adopted her. How old was she? 2 or 3. I had understood that Estella was Molly's daughter. I was sure. I decided to leave Miss Havisham, but when I turned my back, I saw that she was burning. I tried to put off the fire, but I burnt myself. She was badly injured. They put her on the table where she would like to lay on when she's dead. My hands and my body were heavily burnt. They were bandaged. HERBERT really took care of me. My first question to HERBERT was that if everything was all right down the river. I sat with Provis last night, he said, about 2 hours. Where was Clara? She was up and down. Does it hurt, Handel? Well, I was speaking of Provis. Do you know, Handel, he improves? I told you that when I last saw him. Yes, he told me about his life. Do you want to know? Yes, every word of it. Well, it seems there was a woman, a very jealous woman to the last degree. To what last degree? Murder. Oh! She was arrested, but Mr. Jaggers became her lawyer, so she didn't get punishment. Oh, Handel, I hurt you, I'm sorry. It's impossible not to hurt. Yes, go on, please. This young woman and Provis had a little child. One night she got angry with him and told him that he would never see the child again because she would kill it. Did she do it? That is the darkest point. Yes. When did it happen? Well, I guess it had been 3 or 4 years when you saw Provis. How old were you then? 7. Well, if she hadn't been lost, she would be your age. HERBERT, listen. Do you see me well now? Yes. Touch me. I do, my boy. You are not afraid that I have fever or something like that? No, you're all right. Well, now I know that Provis is Estella's father. Chapter 14. I am kidnapped. The next day, I couldn't help myself go to Mr. Jaggers' office. I told Mr. Jaggers about what had happened in the SATIS house and gave the papers to him which Miss Havisham had given to me. I'm sorry, Pip, said he, that we do nothing for you. Well, Miss Havisham was kind enough to ask me, and I said no. Everyone should know their own business, Pip, but if I were you, I wouldn't say no. I asked Miss Havisham something. I asked her about her adopted child, and she told me everything she knew. Ah, did she? Everyone should know their own business, but if I were Miss Havisham, I wouldn't tell them. I know her mother. Mother? Yes, I have seen her in these 3 days. Yes, and so have you. Yes, and her father too. Yes. A certain pause came to him. So you know her father? Yes, he is named Provis, from the New South Wales. How does he prove that he's her father? He doesn't. He doesn't know that her daughter is living. He was surprised at my answer. I told him all I knew. Then he started to talk. Listen, Pip, think that. There is a guilty woman and has a guilty husband. You take the child from the father, but the mother is guilty too. You say to the mother that her child will be saved if she is given to another rich woman. Then she accepts it, and the child is grown up by another rich woman. The mother is saved and happy with her life, and the father does not even know that his child lives. Now, Pip, tell me, for whose sake will you reveal the secret? Do you think the child will be happy to learn that his father is a convict, that her mother lives but left her? Tell me. Wemmick and Mr. Jaggers were closer to each other now. They were talking playfully. When a man entered the office, they had the impression on their face as if that just had lunch. I went to Miss Skiffin's brother with the check in my pocket. He brought Clarriker, Herbert's partner, and we arranged the partnership for Herbert. It was a great feeling for me. On a Monday morning, I received a letter from Wemmick by post. Walworth, burn this as soon as you read. On Wednesday you might do what you know of. Now burn. I showed it to Herbert, and we thought about what to do. I have thought about it over and over, and we should take Startop. He is a good, skilled, and honorable man, he said. I had thought of him more than once. How much will you tell him? Telling him a little is enough. Only tell him that you have to take Provis abroad. Any foreign ship that goes out of England would be okay for us. We found the ship to Hamburg. We took some precautions and fixed the ship. After I returned home, I received a handwritten note with a bad handwriting. If you are not afraid to come to the marshes tonight or tomorrow night at 9, and to come to the house by the lamb kiln, you had better come. If you want any information about your Uncle Provis, you had much better come, and tell no one and lose no time. You must come alone. Bring this with you. I didn't know what to do for a while, but then thinking that it was about Provis, I decided to go. So I caught a coach and arrived there. It was dark, and I ordered dinner for myself in a place. The landlord was talking to me about my life as if my benefactor was Mr. Pumblechook. After the dinner, I went to the marshes. It was a dark night. At first, I wanted to go back, but I thought it would be a cowardly behavior, so I didn't go back. I saw light in the house by the lime kiln. I knocked at the door of the house, but there was no answer. I knocked again. No answer. I called, "Is there anyone?" But there was still no answer. It was beginning to rain fast. Suddenly, I was caught by someone. He tied my hands. "Now," he said, "I've got you." "What is this?" I cried. "Who are you? Help! Help!" "Scream again and I'll make short work out of you." He was in no hurry. Suddenly his face was lighted with the lights. It was Orlick. Whom I had expected I don't know. "Now," he said again, "I've got you. Let me go." "Ah, I'll let you go to the moon, to the stars. Why do you keep me here? Don't you know, you enemy, I've lost my job because of you, and you became between me and the woman I love." "When did I? I didn't do any harm to you," I said. "When didn't you? You liar! I know you will send me out of the country. What are you going to do to me? I'm going to have your life. You're dead." He was drinking heavily. "I tell you something. It was you who made the attack of your sister. It was you, villain! I tell you made the attack. The attack was made because of you. I came to her from behind and attacked her." And all of a sudden he stopped. After a time, I found myself lying on somebody's knees. I saw a face, and it was Trabb's boy. "I think he's all right," he said. "Herbert," I said. "My handle, slowly." and I saw Startop. "Can you stand, my dear Handel?" asked Herbert. "Yes, I can walk." I told Herbert what all had happened. They kept me quiet all day and gave me some drinks. I was feeling better. Chapter 15. Magwitch Leaves Me. It was a March day. I took my bag and put very few things in it. I didn't know where to go, when to go, or what to do. But what I'd do, it was for Provis's sake. We got on the boat and started to sail. On the sea we saw another boat. There were policemen in that boat. They said that they were after Magwitch. When Magwitch saw COMPEYSON in the other boat, he jumped out of the boat and attacked him. They both sunk in the sea, but only Magwitch came out of the sea. So he was arrested for killing COMPEYSON, even though he didn't kill him. He was taken to the police court the next day. He would be sent to the prison, but as a rule, someone who knew him from the prison he stayed in should be found and listened. One day, Herbert told me that he had to go to Cairo. "My dear Handel," he said, "I must go in the time you most need me." Yes, my need is greater than ever. He told me that a clerk is needed in Clara's house, and I would be a suitable one, but I had told him that first I had to arrange Provis's life. A few days later, he went to Cairo. After he was gone, I saw Wemmick on the stairs. He was wearing nice clothes. "How are you, Pip? Come and walk with me." "Well, Wemmick, I know you have things to do, Pip, but it won't be a long walk, believe me, a very short one." I saw a strange eagerness in his offer, so I accepted it. We walked while talking. Then Wemmick suddenly stopped. "Oh, it's a church," he said. "Let's go in." We went in. My surprise was great when I saw the aged parent with Miss Skiffins. "Let's have a wedding," said Wemmick, and took the rings out. After the wedding, he warned me that it's nothing to be mentioned in Mr. Jagger's office. Provis was very ill in prison. For his being ill, they took him into the infirmary. That was a chance for me to be with him and tell him everything he should hear. I saw him every day for a short time, but he didn't get better. He got worse and weaker every day. On the court, I hold his hand. The decision was that he would be sentenced to death. It was the biggest shock in my life. He would be killed together with 32 criminals. But as a rule, there had to be one court day more to make the punishment clear. So he stayed in the prison until that day, and I visited him. But my visits were shortened. In my visits, I recognized that he would die because of his illness, before they kill him. The last day of his life, we had a talk like that. "Dear boy, I knew you would come. Were you waiting at the gate?" "Yes, I always wait there for not to lose time." "Okay, my boy, thank you." "Dear Magwitch, I will tell you something. Do you understand me well?" He pressed my hand. "You had a child that you lost." He pressed my hand stronger. "She lived and found powerful friends. She is living now. She is a lady and very beautiful, and I love her." With a weak and last effort, he took my hand to his lips, and he passed away. Chapter 16. Estella and I Come Together. I was very lonely. For a few days, I lay on the sofa or on the floor. My head was heavy, and I had no purpose in life. I must be in a very bad state that I saw 2 men looking at me at my door. "I regret to say, sir, but you're arrested because of your debts." "What is the debt?" £123.56. "What's to be done? You may come to my house. It is a nice house." I made an attempt to get up and dress myself, but I could not move. "You see, I can't move on. If you take me to another place, I shall soon die." Maybe they answered something, I don't know, but I know that they let me stay in my room. A few days later, I was feeling better, but one thing hadn't changed. While I was lying in the bed ill, whoever came, he seemed to me as Joe. Joe was everywhere, I thought. One day I asked, "Is it Joe?" "Yes, my boy." "Joe, you break my heart. Why do you behave me so good? Be angry with me. Tell me bad things." He stood up and went to the window. I saw him drying his eyes. As I couldn't move to go to him, I whispered, "God, bless him. Bless this Christian man." "When we learnt that you were ill, Biddy told me to come here." "Quick," she said. "Quickly go." Biddy had taught Joe how to write. I asked him about Miss Havisham. "Is she dead, Joe?" "Yes." "What happened to her money and house?" "They are all Estella's, but she gave £400 to Mr. Matthew Pocket for you." "Have you heard who my patron was?" "Yes. It is not Miss Havisham, Pip." "Who is it, do you know?" "Yes, the person who sent you £2 in the public house." The next morning I woke up early. I was feeling better. I went to show Joe that I could walk, but I only saw his note saying that he had gone, for he didn't want to disturb me. There was a receipt with the letter. It was the receipt of my debts. Now I would go to Biddy and tell her how I wanted to marry her. So I went to town. When I arrived there, it was evening. I went to the Blue Boar and saw Mr. Pumblechook there. He seemed to believe that he was my benefactor and talked in a way that he wanted to make me feel bad. Those moments were horrible. Leaving there, I went to see Joe and Biddy. The house was full of flowers when I went there. Then I saw Biddy and Joe arm in arm. "Pip!" cried Biddy, and we hugged. I looked at her. She was very beautiful and white. "Biddy, how smart you are! And Joe, how smart you are, too!" "Yes," they said. "Pip," said Biddy, "it's my wedding day. I'm married to Joe." When I woke up, I was in the kitchen. "He is too tired to hear a surprise," said Joe. "It's my fault," answered Biddy, "but I was very happy." "Dear Biddy," said I, "you have the best husband in the world. And Joe, you have the best wife in the world. Now I'm going abroad to settle my own life. If you have a child, please don't tell him that I was ungrateful." So I went abroad, and I learnt that Herbert was told the partnership, but he wasn't angry with me about this. It had been 11 years since I was abroad, so I returned. I wanted to see Joe and Biddy, and went there. What I saw there was their little son, whom they named Pip. Biddy asked me if my love for Estella was still living, but I told her that I had forgotten that love a long time ago, but I had heard the news that Estella's husband died while riding a horse. One day, I decided to go to the SATIS house. There was no house indeed. It had been destroyed, but Estella was there. "Estella," said I am greatly changed. I wonder you know me." Her fresh beauty had gone, but she was still charming. "It is strange that we meet here, Estella. Do you often come here?" "It is the first time since then, but I will get this house mended and make it live again." "Really?" "Pip, I have often thought of you." "Have you?" "Yes, very often. And you have a place in my heart, too," I said. I took her hands in mine, and we walked out of the ruined place. I saw no sign of another parting from her.